So we're going to go through these terms. Confidentiality probably means what you think it means. People tend to say privacy, or at least they used to, but confidentiality is the word. Privacy is like, well, the stuff that's very trendy now, as in we've got your data but we won't tell it to anybody else. Confidentiality is keeping it protected on the wire or on the way through. And what most people think of when they think about cryptography. Tick that off unless anybody is unclear about it. Integrity is making sure that what you send matches what you receive and that you have full confidence that that's happened and nobody's tampered it on the way through, or it's accidentally got messed up on the way through. Non-repudiation, which Jonna talked about the other day in Show and Tell. So you received something from me. Later I say, I never sent that. You want to be able to prove that that's not the case. And so if through some means demonstrate that this definitely happened and nobody can deny it. Authentication, you are who you say you are. And people often get confused between authentication and authorization, because they're two completely separate things. Authorization is, I say I'm John Hartnett. You have confidence that I'm telling the truth. Authorization is John Hartnett allowed to do this thing? And those are two separate things. Authorization is basically not provided by any of the stuff I'm going to talk about. Like, you have your ACLs. That's separate from public key security. As soon as I've proved who I am, it's up to you to decide what I am or I'm not allowed to do. When I was young, these used to come on the cover of magazines. And obviously it's very simple. And we can all understand it. But Alice wants to send a message to Bob, and it's always Alice and Bob. Actually, I don't write down the OB. It's always Alice and Bob in crypto. Carol differs, it's different names depending on. But yeah, Alice wants to send a message to Bob without Carol being able to intercept it and see what's being said. And Bob might want to reply. I probably don't need to explain how these work, but that's the very simplest, I would say, symmetric encryption. The key is what position the wheel's in. And in this one, there's 26 possible keys. Doesn't say what to do about spaces or numbers or anything else. But as long as Carol doesn't know the key, she can't decrypt it. No possible way of doing that. And that's basically it for symmetric encryption. Obviously, there are much more complicated ones. And the modern ones are pretty much unbreakable, or should be. They have more than 26 keys. They have 1024-bit keys by now. But that basically did us for thousands of years. This a variation of the code wheel is the Caesar cipher, where you're mapping letters to arbitrary letters, not necessarily in alphabetical order. And that did for hundreds or thousands of years until the Second World War, when we started doing things a bit more with those machines, the Enigma machines. It leads us to brute force attacks. So Carol here, she can try, with a code wheel, she can try 26 keys, and on an average of the 13th try, she'll get the key and she'll be able to see what's been said. Pretty simply, you can try 2 to the 1024 times and hopefully be able to decrypt something. So now we come to the key distribution problem, which is where PKR starts sort of showing its appeal. So Alice and Bob have got this thing going on, but before they can do anything, they both need to know this key. So how do we do that? There's, of course, they meet up and exchange it, and that's simple. But if you're on the other end of the earth and your keys, you've lost your key, you've got a challenge in communicating that. Or if you're an army and you've got lots of them, this became a problem for the Germans. They had books of keys. Well, it's a problem. There is something called Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and I don't know the maths of it. I don't know the maths of any of this, whereby, without knowing anything in advance, they can you can go, hey, I want to agree on a key. They go through a sequence of exchanges, and by the end of it, they've got a shared key, which nobody who's seen this exchange can know. But at that point, you've negotiated a secret key between yourself and somebody at the other end. But because you started without a key, you don't know who you've exchanged this secret key with. So you can go, I've had a chat with who I thought was Bob, sorted out this key, and now I can have a private conversation with the person I thought was Bob, but you've done no authentication. So you're having a confidential conversation with who knows who. So is there more I need to say about why key distribution is a problem? No. Probably went fast. Did more than I needed to. Which leads us to asymmetric encryption, which is where the meat of it starts coming in. And what do I do with the rubber? So asymmetric encryption came along in, I think, the 70s by the RSA team, who were the same. Can't remember the names. No, can't remember their names. Who went on to become the RSA that you know from the key fob things, yes, and much other things. And it comes from a property of prime factors of very large numbers, which again I'm not going to go into the maths of, mostly because I can't. But the encryption goes. So hold on. Let's start with generating the keys. So you start with it's an expensive mathematical function where you put some random numbers in. And if you do this on your laptop, it'll still take a few seconds on modern hardware, where it tries and finds a big number that's got 2 prime factors, and then does some transformations to it, and you end up with 2 numbers, K1 and K2. And then there is a function such that if we call what goes in a plain text P, K1 gives a ciphertext. So the ciphertext is the encrypted text that hopefully nobody can translate back into the plain text. And then FCK2 gives you back the plain text. So it's asymmetric because you use the first key to encrypt and the second key to decrypt. And this, usefully, it turns out, will go backwards as well. So if we turn that into a 2 and that into a 1, it still works. And what you do is you choose one of them and call it your private key, and one of them your public key, and then you call it public key encryption. So you're back to Alice and Bob again. Alice has got Alice's public key. Sorry, Alice has got her public key, but she's also got Alice's private key. And Bob has got Alice's public key, and vice versa. Alice can send a message encrypted with her private key, and Bob can decrypt it. Nice. Now the benefit of this is that that public key is doesn't need to be a secret anymore. So previously we had this key distribution problem whereby Alice needed to get her secret over to Bob, but didn't know how to do it without somebody else finding out. Now she can. The classic thing to say is that she can publish a public key in like the small ads in the Times or something. Doesn't matter who else can see it. But she can still encrypt a message such that. Do you know what? I've done this entirely wrong. We'll come to that, and this happens over and over again. Actually, people constantly do it. Alice doesn't do that at all. She encrypts with, and this will. Why did nobody interrupt me?
Isn't that the signature?
Indeed, it'll come up. So she's got Bob's public key, and he decrypts it with Bob's private key. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Right, so in order to send the private message to Bob, Alice has gone to the Times small ads. I said, it says here that Bob's private key is this long number. I will encrypt with Bob's public key, and then I can send that by whatever means I like. I can publish that encrypted message again in the Times small ads. Does that even still exist? Bob can go, there's a message for me in this public place, but only I can read it because I've got my private key and nobody else has. So that's public key encryption. When do we come to digital signatures? We will, yeah, okay. So we've had a sneak peek of the other way around.
I think the important bit there is that you can encrypt with the public key, but you can't decrypt with the same key, can you? So
Exactly, yes.
Secure.
Yes, and that's what makes it asymmetric. Yeah.
In essence, aren't these two the same thing? You have a key that's used for encryption and another key that's used for decryption, but depending who has the public key or the private key, one is called digital signature, while the other is asymmetric encryption, but it's exactly the same.
They are exact same thing, but flipped around.
Yeah.
Well,
and one is used in HTTPS channels, for example, the other is just signing documents.
hashes are going to come in to that, so. So
you don't need to flip the keys around to do signatures. If you decrypt the plain text with the private key, then you have got a signature, because the other person can encrypt the signature with the public key and recover the plain text, and then demonstrate that you were the person who created that ciphertext, because you're the only person who could have created that signature.
Yes, but if you're taking the view that the one key is well known and the other key is not, then only one end is proving who they are, because only one of them has got a secret. But we'll come to that, because we're going to We're going to repeat, yeah, we're going to come to it. All right, okay, replay attacks. This seems like a good time to do replay attacks because we understand that. Right, so Alice has managed to send a message to Bob that says, meet me at Nero's at 2 o'clock, don't tell your wife. And somebody's intercepted it. Carol's intercepted it. She doesn't know what it means. But that doesn't stop her from sending it again. So if she sends it again, Bob decrypts it. It still decrypts perfectly fine. So he turns up at Nero again the same day and looks confused. And that is called a replay attack. It came up several years ago when, car key fobs at first didn't do anything about security, I don't think. Oh, they must have done some. They were called keys, but the they play a secret. But thieves soon learned that they could just record whatever radio signal was coming out, play it back, and unlock the car. So again, that's a replay attack. And there's various defences against that. For example, just make it idempotent what you do with your decrypted message, or put a date in it. Anything to make sure that you don't receive something twice when the second one might not come from who you thought it was. And the other is challenge response, which we'll go through, which is well, we'll do it with the cards example. So the way to get around that was to make the conversation between the car and the key fob two-way, where the key fob goes, I would like you to unlock, please, over that bit needn't be encrypted, it just says I'd like you to unlock, please. And he goes, well, if you're my key, then encrypt this random number and tell me how it comes out. Then the key goes, all right, I've got your random number, encrypt it with my private key, send it back to you. Car decrypts that with the public key. Do we need to draw? Does anybody want me to draw that?
Yeah, but if that's intercepted.
Right, let's rub that out. Okay, key. I'm going to call it a fob because key is overloaded. Fob. Unlock, please. They're always polite. Car. Encrypt this. Challenge. So the challenge is a random number. It goes just encrypt. 1, 2, 4. That's the 6, 9, 2, 1. So the fob runs F. Private key. Challenge. And sends the result over here. Okay, so I won't call it challenge, I'll call it P for plain text because this is the ciphertext. The car goes F, public key, that's C, which should come out as 1, 2, 4, 6, 9, 1. And when it's satisfied that that matches that, it unlocks.
Yeah, I was saying where the arrow is, or if that's intercepted.
Well, it's intercepted here. Right, so if somebody records that, yeah, so that's where you would record that for your replay attack. But that challenge changes every time. So it's Well, I say it's random. It's a random number that's generated each time there's a request to unlock. So thief records that. 5 minutes later goes, right, I want to steal that car. They go, unlock please. The car goes, encrypts this challenge. Different number. Thief can't do anything with this knowledge. They can't generate an encrypted, they can't generate a ciphertext that this functional will turn into that. There's no way they can.
Okay, so it gets sent the first time and you can't send it again because it's changed by that time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can they jam the signal so the first communication back from the key to the card doesn't take place? And they come to another device and present themselves as being the key. And do some radio
Probably. I mean, there are.
There's a video released by Birmingham Police with a couple of guys with two black boxes, literal black boxes, and they just put the black box close to your house door, and you have the car fall somewhere nearby. They get a signal from it, and they have a second guy with another black box. They just go next to the car, and the car starts. And
The point is
get
never
into the
leave
car
your
and
key
run
fob
away.
next to your door.
But they could also not have those boxes, stand by your door and punch you in the face, and take your key. I mean, it's a really expensive way of stealing someone's key, that when punching them in the face is a cheaper way of achieving the same goal.
Maybe, in the same way triggering the alarm. So I wonder how, if it can be prevented somehow, or if this encryption would be enough. And this
I
example-
don't see, if you just literally have a radio repeater, I don't see how you can stop somebody from, but yeah, all that's doing is letting you use your key fob from further away, isn't that
I
right?
think the key fobs are a weak implementation rather than a fault of the thing.
That's challenge response anyway. And I'm sure it can be bolstered up with more complexity, but it's probably enough. By the way, that's half an hour. I should have said what my intention was to... We're halfway through. I don't know if it's going to get more complicated and sort of longer-winded, but if anyone feels we want to go to the pub, then just speak up, because my view was that I would go through it at the pace it happens and then come back again to do what we've not covered.
Is it worth doing it as a two-parter? Is that what you're proposing?
Possibly. Anyway, we're still going to move on. We'll maybe do another quarter of an hour and see how we feel. Secure hashing. Who doesn't know what hashing is?
There is a video on our YouTube channel that describes it.
Okay. Do you want to do it?
No, I remember Graham had a very pithy sentence that reminded me what it was, and it's very helpful, but I can't remember what that was.
No, can I?
Is it,
YouTube channel.
isn't it a mushed up cow? You can
I'll
only
do-
go-
Oh, yeah, it's a
Mashed
corned
up
beef
cow.
hash.
Corned beef hash. I'll do. There's a few sort of things that lead into it. First is checksums, which isn't anything, well, it is to do with, but so we're aware of a checksum where your credit card's got 16 digits on it, and the last one is generated from the first 15. And if so, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of getting it right. But if it's one of the other ones, then it demonstrates that there's been a cock-up reading it, and it's not to prevent fraud. It's just to prevent accidental transmission errors. So that's one metaphor, I suppose, to keep in mind. Then the other one is that Java collections, at least, and probably in the implementation of JavaScript, we use hashing for collections. And in that respect, it's turning something big, and also in the security stuff we're talking about, it's taking something big and folding it down into something small in a repeatable way. So if you take a great big document, several megabytes in size, you can apply some maths to it, and come out with, how big's it? Let's say a 16-bit number. So doc1 collapses down to 243. That's an 8-bit number. What fits in an 8-bit number. And doc2 collapses down to 311. And if you're storing these in a Java hash map, for example, and you wanted to use these documents as keys, it would do it by every time you put it into the map, it would do all that maths, work out it was 243, and say, all right, I'm going to associate 243 with doc1, doc2, and then when you want to look it up again, it would do the same maths, find the 3 and 1, and then link it up. And it's a performance thing in Java. It's a way of sorting it. And it's possible that doc3 through, in this case it's an 8-bit, it's through a 1 in 256 coincidence, also maps to 243. And so in your Java hash map, you'd have doc3 and doc2 in the same slot, but that's fine. You know that's going to happen, and you've got it's merely performance hack. Right. So that's our use of hashes, but it doesn't really prove anything. In secure hashing, we want to use it as proof of something. So the idea is that we take secret message. No, it doesn't need to be secret, sorry. We'll call it doc1 again. Put it through F, end up with a number, doc2, put that through F, and if those two are equal, I'm not going to say that they're going to be the same, but if somebody's claimed that these two are the same document, and you want to show that they're not lying, you want to be able to compare these two smaller numbers and say with a large amount of confidence that is a match. Now, examples of these algorithms are MD5, which is now a little bit discredited, and SHA 512 it is now, I think. With SHA, are we up to SHA 1024 yet? I'm not sure. The longer the hash is, the more unique it is, obviously, and that's what people recommend you use now. Are we happy with that? Have I? Yeah, so Alice wants to send a message to Bob again. And not only does she want it to be, well, in fact, let's forget that she wants it to be encrypted. So Carol can read this now. Alice to Bob. Carol's allowed to read it, but Alice wants Bob to be. Okay, I've done that. I'm going to go on to digital signatures, and I'll come back to Salty. Carol can actually see this now, but Alice wants Bob to have a confidence that it actually came from her. So now, Alice takes the document, the plain text. She feeds it through hash algorithm, which gives her P hashed. She then passes P hashed through her private key, And then she sends both P, and so that's a signature. She sends both the plain text and the signature to Bob. And Bob takes it and he goes, I've got the document plain text, I'll put it through the hash, which gives a PH again. And then he'll take the signature and pass that through, I'll call it enc again, but key pub Alice to get, call that A, call that B. So that's what Alice is doing, that's what Bob's doing. Hash the message, decrypt the signature, and then check that A equals B. And that demonstrates to him that Alice, well, that the person who sent this knows Alice's private key. Is that satisfactory? I think what Jonna was hinting at is you could leave out this hash altogether. You could just go, I'm going to send the plain text and I'm going to send, well, actually, you could say I'm going to send the plain text encrypted with my private key, which anyone can decrypt with my public key. But the downside of that is you're sending a very large chunk of encrypted text just so it can be a signature. So, you know, what this message looks like, and this is where I wish I'd prepared better and given you, sort of had a slide, but it would look like gobbledygook. So the way I just described would look like a screen full of gobbledygook that you can only read if you go to the trouble of finding Alice's public key and just decrypting. Whereas what I just described, sorry, what I previously described with the hash is message. So the message in plain text that you can read, and then the signature at the bottom as a little small chunk of stuff. And probably, if you're old enough, seen sort of S-MIME messages that look like that, or you used to see stuff in news groups where they had like a PGP signature at the bottom because they were sort of crypto geeks who thought it was really important that the stuff that you'd put on like public forums was signed by you and people prove that it was that. Is that making reasonable sense? So, in conclusion, the signature is the encrypted hash of the plain text, and you can go through process to demonstrate that the signature matches. Right, so we jumped a bit ahead because I didn't read my own slide. Another thing you can do with hashes, which I should have talked about before, is about the way that you store passwords. So a Unix password file, or, well, the password file that you put in a web server or anything like that. A naive implementation of that is you've just got a big list of username, password, username, password, username, password. Obviously, if somebody gets hold of that, then you're compromised. So pretty early on, the Unix guys at least went hashed password. So a password file. And they took the view that the password file then didn't need to be protected very much. So anybody could read that password, but it would just say John and then A, B, we'll pretend it's a, well, yeah, 1, 2, 4, 3, 1, B, A, 2, the hashed version of it. So then when I provide my password, the thing that's checking it is going to take whatever I type in, apply a hash to it, and then check that it matches that. And that's all right. Who wants to name a hole in that, vulnerability in that?
Common passwords will always still have the same hash.
Yeah. Yeah, so if Richard's got the same password as me, then in this file, which we've said anybody's allowed to download and look at, it's not actually the case usually, but it's still, we say, you know, when these leaks happen, it's files that look like this that get leaked. So somebody can go, well, if I know Richard's password, I know John's password too. And that also means it's likely to be a common one. Or I can just go, well, out of all these leaks from Facebook, I know that 100,000 all have this password I don't know, so I can focus my brute forcing at working out that one. And you know what salting is already, you know, like that. So what they do is instead apply what's called a salt. So at the time that you write this, you take in the password that my new password, when I'm creating a new password. This part of it picks a random number, prepends or somehow mixes that together with my password. Then applies the hash to that, which means that this comes out differently. And stores the whole of that in the password file. And then Rich comes along with the same password, and it takes that same password, it makes up a new random number here, mixes it together again the same way, comes up with a different hash, and so that hole has been plugged. And at the time that you need to check a password, it takes the password that you provide, mixes in this number that it can pull out of here, so that solves that problem. Salting covered. There more I want to say about that? No, I don't think there was. That's fine. But that salting would apply to signing emails as well. So you do this, the same stuff goes on there. So a fully encrypted and signed email. So we saw the one where you had your plain text and your signature. And hopefully all understood that. The next is that Alice wants to send a message to Bob. She wants Bob to have full confidence that it came from her, and she wants Carol not to be able to read it on its way through. So we want something that looks like ciphertext, signature. And I probably don't need to go through the process of doing that, because you can put it together from all of what we've just done.
Would you use the signature of the plain text, or would you use the signature of the ciphertext?
You'd use the signature of the plain text.
Why?
No special reason. Well, I guess the reason would be that you're then not doing any sort of... You're using the same routines, aren't you? So if you imagine it's an email program with like options. Do I want to encrypt the body? Do I want to sign it? You know, why do something different depending on whether there might be crypto geeky reasons not to do a signature of the plain text. I can't think of any, but really subtle things come in when you start. You know, there's stuff about one of the symmetric algorithms is triple DES, in which you encrypt it with one key and then decrypt it with another key and then encrypt it again with the first key. And people say, well, why not use 3 different keys? And some maths geek steps in and says, oh, well, actually, it's easier to find vulnerabilities if you use 3 keys than it is if you use 2. Like, I don't know. If you say so. There's a theme to go into. Doesn't fall into any of those slots, but one of the themes is there's a certain level of stuff where you just shouldn't touch it with a barge pole unless you really know what you're doing, because the vulnerabilities are, you know, really, really subtle to the extent that, you know, mere mortals can't understand them. Like, you know, the heartbeat stuff, heart bleed that came up last year. Yeah. Oh, actually, that was quite an easy one. But yeah, they come up, and it's you know, stuff deep in. Like, oh, if you encrypt it with these numbers, then it biases slightly towards a thing, and a determined attacker can spot patterns. And it's, oh, crikey. So let's imagine that you just follow what I've said and have made this by the sort of way that follows. What are we going to do having received it? So Alice has sent this. She's encrypted it with Bob's public key. I have to say this, I still have to say this really slowly. She's encrypted it with Bob's public key. I'll say it's not for you, for your benefit, to make sure I get it right. And she's signed it with her own private key. So what are the steps we need to go through to get this, to satisfy ourselves that this is what we want it to be? Start with that.
Decrypt and validate the key.
Okay, so we decrypt that with Bob's private key. Then,
Validate the signature.
first step of that,
Validate the public key.
so we take that, we use Alice's public key to turn that into a hash. So Alice's public key turns that into a hash. Then what do we need to do?
Ask somebody else if that's the correct hash.
We need to apply the hashing algorithm to this to get a hash. Yeah? And then we assert that those two are equal. And that's all the maths we need to do to prove to ourselves that that signature is the correct signature. And if this has got a date in it or something, then that will also satisfy us that, well, it'll allow us to be idempotent in the way we treat it at least, and save us from replay attacks. And, you know, typically think of an email. Email headers always have a date in them, so that fixes that. Anybody not clear? Public key distribution problem. We could stop at that. There's a whole theme going on here, but well, yeah, stop me when you want. Right, so Bob puts his public key in the Times saying, I'm Bob, this is my public key. What's the problem with that? Anyone could have done that. So although we've said that public-private key solves it, only up to a point. What happens is you get it and you go, well, that's Bob's key from now on. But at that point where I got it, I was putting blind trust in the source. And it comes back to a similar problem to what we had here in the first place. So that although you can get it more easily, you still need to validate it somehow, and it would come down to, well, I'll have a phone conversation and we'll compare a hash of the key. I say, all right, well, I've got your key from wherever I got it. It hashes down to these checksums. Is that right? Right, we're agreed. But that's a lot of process, and it doesn't scale up at all. What if you're dealing with, if you've got 1,000 customers, or 10,000, or 1 million customers, you don't want to go through that process for each of them in order to send them encrypted emails. So distributing public keys is still a problem, and that's where we have certificates. I'm going to stop. I'm going to do certificates another day because it's going to take 10 minutes and it'll lead nicely into Web of Trust.